Hi, with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how long it is before people become adults in today's world. Now, just looking at this in through a sort of a wide angle lens. When I sort of left high school, going to college, that sort of thing, there was a very small number of people went to college, and it was a merit only thing. It was changing, but it was merit only in those days. So unless you got a certain strictly pass or fail grade, you just didn't go to university. They were starting to begin the sociology type courses in Australia at the time, so it was wasn't long before that started to explode the number of kids doing gender studies, that sort of thing. But for most people, it went something like this. There was a big shakeout of kids at high school in the third year of high school, because there's quite a few kids were turning. I think the cutoff time was 14 years and 9 months old. That was the minimum amount you had to. You couldn't leave school any earlier than that. There was a minimum amount of education. I think each kid had to have. It was like 10 years, I think, was the thing. So, but there was a big shakeout of kids there that weren't doing any good at school. Some of them didn't really want to be there, and they would go off and do things like apprenticeships and other stuff. Now, it was still in those days, the heyday, the high point was past. Still in those days, somebody working a job in a factory could still just about afford a lower middle class lifestyle, and somebody that, say, did it, became an apprentice, plumber or electrician or something like that, they could, if they had a mind to, they could start up a practice, hire apprentices, that sort of thing, and they could do. Some of them could do pretty well for themselves. Or you could get a job with, say, like an electricity generating plant as a full-time electrician, and you'd be effectively be a public servant, I guess, but you could work there. You could start there as an apprentice at 15 and you could retire at age 65, having that continuity and certainty of income. And again, you could live a middle-class lifestyle from doing that. So there was that big shakeout. There was another shakeout again at the end of what was sort of junior high school, and there was a further shakeout, like in year 11, kids that ended up being just about good enough to go on to senior high school, but they didn't. They struggled a bit as students, and so they were told, look, you're wasting your time here, why don't you leave? So and then there was of the kids that began high school, there was about 3% that went on to university. So that just shows you what a narrow band it was. Now, these kids came out of university, other than the very tiny handful that went on to do masters and PhDs and that sort of thing. They were all finished at university, say, by age 22, 23 at the latest, most of them age 21, and they were out working hard, full-time jobs, trying to save money to be able to buy a house and so on. The cost of living at the time and the expectations of life were different, so that it wasn't surprising to find a bunch of uni kids, renting out a house, and there'd be 10 of them in a 4 or 5 bedroom house, but it was only very temporary until they got their degree, and then they'd be off. Some of them lived with parents, and some of them had better off parents, but most kids were leaving home. Not all, but most kids were leaving home at 18, 19, 20, and going off and doing their own thing. So the responsibilities of life began much earlier. There were far more kids that were starting jobs, paying bills, and starting families, getting married, buying houses, starting businesses at a much younger age than we see now. And also there was a much higher proportion of kids that were finishing their after high school education, whether it be technical colleges or universities or whatever it might be, were finishing with either a very small or no debt at all. It was quite common to work full time or work multiple part-time casual type jobs while you're at university to pay the bills. That wasn't unusual. It's quite rare today. I mean, you still see it, but mostly, the kids I'm aware of doing university, they're doing a bullshit course anyway, and they're working somewhere between 10 to 15 hours a week at some casual job, maybe at like a retail store or something like that. So, and that money they're using for, as personal expenditure money rather than money to reduce the size of their loan, their college fee loan. So there was a very different idea, and the idea of being productive was also a prevalent thought in those days. Certainly it was forefront of my mind. Doing something worthwhile, producing something, creating something, achieving something. Even today, I still hold that view. And the view that if I was doing something productive and creative and achieving things, it could be building a business or I don't know, inventing the cure for cancer. It doesn't matter, but doing something that had some sort of wider benefit. Everyone else was doing that. Then we come back to Adam Smith's and Wealth of Nations sort of invisible hand. If everyone's producing it, creating something that's of utility value, wealth creating, if everyone's doing it, then it kind of benefits the entire society. Very different attitudes prevail today, of course, but so a different thing. The idea of wanting responsibility, taking responsibility on, getting married, having families, starting businesses, buying houses, taking on mortgages, all these sorts of things were the talk that around the water fountain at the office was the talk that not everybody, but most people had. There was always a mixture of people. Those that were having too much of a good time being sort of single playboys or something. There was always those type of people around of both genders. But most people were looking at wanting to and looking forward to, believing it was their duty to take on social various responsibilities such as marriage, children, mortgages, and the like. So now this meant that people grew up earlier, taking on responsibility for others, and how am I going to make my future worthwhile? What am I going to do? What am I going to produce and create? What am I going to achieve? These sorts of things, and these are different times. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But that sort of responsibility makes you grow up much quicker. It turns you from being a sort of a directionless, aimless, young person come child. It turns you into an adult quite quickly when you have to take on those sort of responsibilities and you have to make decisions on behalf of others, but be responsible for your bad decisions and your failures and so on. That's a very adult. That really brings out the adult in people. So, or most people, maybe not everybody. And having to look at the long term. Okay, I've got a mortgage here for 25 years, and I have to pay this off, and I have to be in a position to pay it off, or other things such as more emotional sides of the adult thing of the idea of Christmas Day and the presents under the Christmas tree and the look on the kids' faces. Like that's it was unthinkable to me to not be in a position to put the full array of gifts under the Christmas tree. Santa Claus was coming in a big way, at my place. So, but these are part of the adult thing, of that sense of responsibility, that sense of delivering, tangible benefit to those around you. And that could range from family members, children, work colleagues. So again, these are all very adult type responsibilities, adult views. But today that's quite different. I don't think it's a single person. In certainly in the street, for example, I mean, just I don't have to go very far. Just the street I'm in, there's I think every child or every person in the street under the age of 35 is living with their parents, and this is where the kids are at college. They've decided to go back to college to do another degree, so they're like professional uni students. Then There's another kid in his early 30s who's just some fucks about as some sort of half-assed musician or something. I'm not really sure. And the list just goes on. There's no one who's looking at or considering or attempting to make something of their lives. And it goes without saying that people that stay children for longer are more easily controlled by emotive things, such as what's the biggest issue. You go to 35-year-old Billy Bob who's never actually had a job in his life, and say, what's the biggest issue is climate change. Biggest issue is Nazis everywhere, fighting the Nazis, and biggest issue is me going down and waving placards, that sort of thing. But isn't the bigger issue you sort of putting together some sort of future for yourself? Now, a lot of these kids are really, or young people, they're just directionless, completely directionless. They're wandering around like zombies for fuck's sake. Now, should those people have the vote? Should the voting age be raised? And if so, to what age? So, if the voting age was raised to even 25 years old, I don't think the leftist parties would ever win an election again. So they'd fight it tooth and nail. Or would rarely win an election. If you raised the voting age to 30, then I think they would never win an election. So how do you have the vote only for people that have a stake in society or are sacrificing something for society? For example, people the kids that are drafted at the age of 18 to go and fight, like in Vietnam or the World Wars or something like that. They're drafted at 18 to go and fight in the front lines. There's people shooting at them. There's a very decent chance you're going to be dead, shot to pieces or maimed. So they should have the vote. They're being asked to sacrifice their lives for the state. So they should have the vote. That's perfectly okay in my view. If you volunteer and you go into the front line, those too should have the vote. So conscripted definitely, but if you're a volunteer, then you should have the vote too. Or people like the firefighters that rush into the burning building to save the babies type thing. They should have the vote. Now the firefighter that works as an administrative clerical officer in the office shuffling paper and doesn't go anywhere near any danger, I don't think they should have the vote. So there are certain occupations where you're putting your life on the line for the benefit of society. Again, the burning building, getting shot at, and I think those people should have the vote. Now, outside of that, though, people that have no stake in society and don't give a shit, how do you even categorize or evaluate that without politicizing it, which would be the big challenge. But should those people have the vote? And given now that what was hitherto a generation or generations that were putting their lives on the line and were becoming, really had a stake in society at quite a young age. It wasn't unusual when I was a kid to find that the people that had left high school the year before were now running around with children. They had little toddlers and that sort of thing. And wow, I thought that was a bit much then. Gee whiz, I'd go wait a few years before that. But nonetheless, these things were happening, and they were. I'm not sure widespread to be the term, but certainly plenty of it was going on. So these people are having a stake in society. They're just procreating on its own isn't a stake in society, but doing it within a family structure and the mortgage and all the other trappings that go with it, that is having a stake in society. And that most young people now are waiting for inheritance. I'm never going to own a house. I'm never going to have anything. I'm never going to have a full-time job. I'm never going to have a career. I will never have any stake in society. All I'm going to do is live with my parents until they die and then inherit the house. That's it. That's it. Now, to what extent should those people have the vote or a say? Should people who have a stake in society have more say? Then you run the risk where the rich are the only people who have a right to vote because they have conspired to impoverish everyone else. So they don't have a future or a stake in society. So this comes back to a middle-class society where the majority of the population can have a stake, as in a material, financial, physical stake in society. And that's what's been taken away from the Western world. And this is, and as I mentioned earlier, this is a cost of living thing. in 1970, 4.5 years of give or take 4.5 years of income would be enough to buy the average priced house. It's average income buying average priced house. 4.5 years. Now today, that's nearly 18 years. So that gives you just a sort of indication as to the difference, the extra amount of money it takes to do, or alternatively, it goes to show the decline in purchasing power. Now, as purchasing power declines, the middle class disappears. Particularly, there was a large lower middle class, say in 1970, but that all disappears, and now the sort of people that can afford that lifestyle today are like 2 or 3% of the population. And if you want to live in a nice middle class area where there's the tree-lined streets and the good schools and all that sort of stuff, then you're looking at not even 1% of the population can afford that from their income. Inheritance is another matter. Is it marriage, children, mortgage, or is it placard waving about the manufactured climate change emergency? I mean, what now is defined as having a stake in society? Now, certainly from my perspective, purchasing power is, along with the voting, purchasing power is the essence of a middle class society. If you have the purchasing power to have a stake in society, most people will do it. And once they have a stake in society, they acquire a level of responsibility and concern about the future, and concern about the present status of things, concern about their children, and so on and so forth. And once you have that, then that changes the complexion of society quite drastically. And I think that as so few people now have the purchasing power to have a stake in society, whether it's because jobs were sent offshore to China, or because international investor cabals were buying up swathes of real estate, pricing it out of the reach of what hitherto is the middle class. It doesn't really matter the reason, but the complexion has changed. And with that, should the voting age and voting restrictions also change. You've been with Tassus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.